Hello, and welcome to our Passion for Moms webinar series, Motherhood, Leaders Defining the Future. And on today's program, I have with me Emily Mills from Texas, and I am excited to hear her story and how God is using her platform as a wife and mother and the ministry that He's given her to share the gospel and make a difference in the lives of many women that she works with. So Emily, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's so good to be here in this virtual world that we are now living in.
Absolutely. Well, Emily, why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about who you are, your background. Let us get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I went to Baylor University and graduated in 2000. While I was there, I was involved in a campus ministry as a worship leader. Married, as I fit the Baylor stereotype, even though I did not want to. I fell in love with the worship leader at the ministry. And we got married in 2000, had a baby in 2003. We were traveling, we were leading worship. And along that journey, I was also serving the homeless on Friday mornings. And I would meet women who had come in, been working the streets at night, who were coming in for breakfast. Sometimes they would bring children with them, and my heart for the poor and the ostracized really just began to explode. And there was this huge dichotomy in my life and Brett's life as we were involved in student life conferences and even early day passion conferences. And what there was this dichotomy between what was happening in our world and what we were singing about on the stage. And there was this moment one night where I really just felt like God told me, if the bulk of your ministry happens on a platform and on a stage, you're going to miss the kingdom by miles.
Wow.
And so I told Brett this, and I said, I'm praying for a way to put hands and feet to the songs that we're singing. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm just letting you know that's what I'm asking for. Well, after my first daughter was born in 2003, we were invited in 2004 to sing for a women's ministry in Austin. What I didn't know was that women's ministry was reaching women who were on the streets and in strip clubs. And so one by one, women took the stage and they began to share their stories of exploitation, of sexual abuse, of a childhood abandonment and neglect. And I mean, I was a wreck. I was completely, really just in awe of their resiliency. And also in this tiny piece of my heart, there was this connection because I had experienced childhood abuse and I knew that it could have been me. I could have been one of these women. And so I really said, Brett, I think those are my women. I think I need to know them. So we loaded up the car, headed back down I-35 into Waco from Austin. And on that journey, I just leaned over to Brett and I said, hey, it's 2 weeks till Easter. How about we go to the strip clubs and bring Easter baskets to the strip clubs? And he was like, so you're really taking this like seriously? And I was like, I think we're supposed to go, and I've got my daughter like in the car seat as a newborn. And so off we went. And off we went to building relationships, to really engaging women who had been exploited and trafficked. And fast forward, my daughter's 17 now. So this 16 years, we've been doing life on life, building community, listening, learning, really identifying like, what have those gaps been in service? Because I just find like the kingdom is in the gap. It's always just in the gap. And that's where Christ just fills it. And God just wants to build up the foundations, to bring equality, to bring access, to bring leverage to the poor. And so, so we started JSL, and in 2007 gave it a name. And then here we are in 2020, and we have a social enterprise called Lovely. We've got all these wonderful little products. I don't know if you can see that there. Oh, you can't see it. It's our cute little
So fun.
So it's Survivor Made, Survivor Paid is our social enterprise. We help women with dignified work and microloans to start their own businesses. We have job training programs. We do case management, and we outsource counseling right now, but I really, really, I know that counseling and trauma-informed care within the work that we do as a drop-in center is going to be crucial long-term, as well as housing. So we're not there yet, but we're just building as God gives us vision, gives us resources, and really what the women want, what they want.
That's so powerful to recognize that it's in the gaps. We can go to church every Sunday, but if we're missing it, the other 6 days of the week, we're missing opportunities to make disciples and to share the gospel. What did that look like? Well, first of all, let me ask you, tell our audience what JSL stands for.
Sorry. So in 2007, we named the ministry and the outreach, Jesus Said Love. Okay. And we really did that because at the time we weren't sure if it was just going to be women in the clubs or where God was. So actually I wrote the worst song I've ever written in my life. And the chorus was Jesus Said Love. And so it was a terrible song and I knew it, but when it came time to name the organization, I just kept coming back to Jesus Said Love. And one of our team members said, of course, JSL. It's JSL. Wow. So Jesus Said Love is the organization, and Lovely Enterprises is our social enterprise of Jesus Said Love.
Okay. So here I'm visualizing a young mom who's been doing ministry and, coming out of a probably fairly safe environment with college and getting married, and you're going to do ministry, and now you're totally pivoting in what your interactions day to day are going to look like. How does that make sense? Because I'm thinking about moms who feel like they're being called out of their comfort zones. And so often we want to stay safe. We don't want to take those risks. And I think even there's protection as a mom. We're wanting to protect our kids, and that can be protection physically, but also exposure. What was going through your mind during those early days of how you're going to just do it?
Yeah. It's so funny. I have so many stories that just like pop through my head right when you're asking those questions, because I look back at the early days, and one of the first things that I heard from women's groups. So I'm just going to make a confession. I've not been the best at like women's group things, as far as like small group Bible studies, or I did try to do like Monday morning things with other moms. I think some of it was because, like you said, our churches are really conditioned to appeal to safety and to appeal to our comfort, and to appeal to what that really means is monetary comfort. It means social comfort. And I just don't see Jesus representing that in the Gospels. God is so clear and evident in Christ that God does desire for us to be taken care of, that he's a refuge for us. But it certainly doesn't mean that we're not going to have hardship, or that there's not going to be things in life. And I just see Christ running into those suffering places. And so one of the moms, when we were at church getting this whole thing started at our home church, we led worship on a Saturday night service there. And so we would share the vision. We'd say, hey, just bring supplies and we'll gather them up and take them to the clubs. And this one mom came up to me and she was like, I think it's so great that you're called to do this. I'm called to be a mom.
Wow.
And my spirit was like crushed. I went home and I thought, what are we telling women and moms in the church? That you have to choose, like follow Christ and be obedient to what Christ is doing, or just be a mom, which there is no
right.
just a mom. And so I thought, that's my calling too. Like I don't get to not be a mom as I'm following where Christ is leading me. So that was the first kind of dichotomy that I had to wrestle with as a young mom. Then as Hattie, our oldest daughter, grew, we had shirts at the time that when we would go into the club said, Jesus loves strippers. And when she started reading, as a kindergartner, she was like, stripper, you know, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. So she's like, Mommy, what's that? What we used to tell her was people are gathering together and we're going to give gift bags to women. She'd see the people come at our house. She'd pray. She'd watch us pray and take the gift bags to the clubs. But when she started reading, she really started asking deeper questions. Right. Well, what is that? And we first kind of framed it out into terms of modesty, because she was learning about being modest, you know, with her clothes when she went to school and things like that. So we just said, well, you know, it's a stripper is someone who doesn't necessarily practice modesty the way that we practice modesty. It just doesn't mean the same thing to them. Mm-hmm. She would say, oh, okay, well, I heard you saying you were going to a club. So there's a club with a lot of not modest people. And I was like, there is a club with a lot of people. And she would say, well, you know, why? And I just said, money.
Wow.
Money. They need money. They need jobs. They need money. And that was the reality. And I'm telling you, it's still the reality today that women do not wake up and think, I want to go sell my body.
Right. Absolutely.
That is, I have not met one person in all of 16 years that really just dreamt of doing this as a little girl. The truth is there's economic gaps, and women have historically been on the bottom of that gap and had less rights historically. Well, that sets you up, you know, to be behind. And so obviously a lot of these moms, a lot of these women in the clubs we met were moms and bore the brunt and bore the burden of raising their children, either with a grandparent or with a boyfriend, or were living in multi-family kind of apartment type things. And so really we were looking at what systemic poverty looked like. We were looking at major economic upward mobility, social capacity, women whose kids are going to be in your kids' public schools sharing resources with, but you don't see the mom, you don't see her, you don't see who she is and what's making her up. So yeah, that's really how we began to talk about these issues with our kids, was not to blame her. She's not a terrible, horrible woman who's making immoral decisions. We got to say these are women who are also created in the image of God, who have children created in the image of God, but the world and their life choices or their life circumstance has led them to this place, and God still commands that we go and love and really support them, figure out ways to support them.
So good. You know, I'm thinking about the chasm between the safety of the church building and what so often we want that comfortable lifestyle to look like. You know, we want to sign up to follow Jesus, but we want it to be on our terms or our comfort level. And we're not wanting to give a lot of sacrifice in the process. How have you been able to see the church either come alongside and get dirty with you, if you will, you know, do the hard stuff? Or have you still seen a separation gap between, like what the one mom said to you of, you know, I'm here and you're there? What has that looked like just in the community that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I think we've made a lot of progress as the church. I think there's always going to be things that Christ is wanting to reform in us as a body. But I do see a lot of progress. You know, when we started in 2004, I could not wear the Jesus Loves Strippers shirt in my church building. It wasn't allowed. I couldn't say commercial sex industry, even though that's what this is, because it just wasn't understood. It was a little distasteful, and it was like, well, what about young ears? And I'm like, well, they're already watching porn on their computers.
Right.
So we might want to frame out what this is.
Sure.
But when I went to California to speak to churches and youth groups there,
Yeah.
they were like, oh yeah, like come in the youth group and tell us all about what you're doing, you know. So there was just, you saw the South just being a little bit slower to engage some of the harder, tougher issues as a church, just a little more, you know, conservative. And yet, when we started understanding the human trafficking crisis, I can pinpoint and say that 2007 was a really pivotal year. And when you go and look at a lot of human trafficking organizations, a lot of times you're going to see the year 2007 or 2010. I don't know what it was about those 2 years, but there was just this push, several little pop-up ministries all over the United States that were founded, that began doing outreaches. There began a move to say something's happening in regards to women and sexual exploitation, and we're going to step in. So it was just really kind of a move of God across the country.
And you haven't been able to pinpoint what that was?
I mean, I don't know. I know founders of other organizations that say, yeah, I mean, we started in 2007 or we started in 2010. And that's when we kind of all started going, looking online. Really, I could say that Facebook probably had some to do with that. It became an educational tool. So about in 2007, we started a Facebook page. 2009, we expanded to Dallas. And 2010, a lot of anti-trafficking work began to take off. So yeah, I mean, social media, getting more information out into the hands of more people, educating the church became really important to say, you know, this is God's call for, I mean, and you see women all throughout scripture who were exploited. I mean, I think of Rahab, and I think of the fact that she's in the very lineage of Christ, and what you see about Rahab, you know, making this deal with the Israelite spies. I mean, she not only had her home that she was selling her body in, but it was a social enterprise too. She had on the rooftop these stalks of wheat laying out to dry, and that's where she hid the spies. And so it's kind of like you see women who've always been faced with poverty and oppression, and how that's linked to selling their bodies.
Right.
And that Christ doesn't stand in judgment of them. He doesn't. He's like, no, here's another way. Make a covenant with me.
Right.
Let's learn this way. And so I just think I think it's beautiful that you see women who were historically ostracized, and you see them in scripture, and Christ even making a way there.
Well, and it's such a beautiful opportunity then for you as a mother to use that platform to be able to help your children and your audience to recognize that, you know, we can't stand in judgment. You know, Jesus doesn't stand in judgment. And so for us to recognize that we should be pursuing the lost and whatever that looks like in the platforms that God's given us, but for us to have a much more compassionate heart instead of the judgmental heart. Because I find even in our culture today of all that's going on, there's a lot of stone throwing and not a lot of hand holding. Yes. And so I think the great difference of being able to help our kids understand, you know, that we need to be the hands and feet of Jesus and stop casting stones like the Pharisees, you know. So what did it look, go ahead, did you have?
Well, I think I was just going to say that I think one of the things it's been so important with being a mom and doing this is because the women, like I said, that we reach are largely mothers. And it is such a powerful connection to say, I see you. Yes. And show me pictures of your kids. What was your birthing experience like? I've been in the hospital rooms. We've been invited into sacred spaces because we were moms, and we got to be there with a woman who had no family, who had no one to hold her hand, to walk her through birth. And we got to be there. And so that's like, heaven on earth, And so these just really tight, sacred spaces that we just see Emmanuel, like the presence of God. And as a mom, I just have leaned in and really, really taken to heart that my children are also a part of this work, that I don't have to choose one or the other. I really believe it is so important to have guided exposure with your kids. Nothing is off limits at our house.
Right.
Our kids can talk to us about anything. We talk openly about drugs. We talk openly about sex. We talk openly about the TV shows they're watching or whatever. And I'm not judging them. I'm not judging them for what they're coming home with or what they're telling me their friend is doing. And I think that's so important, because I can say just to them really realistically and honestly, yeah, we had to take a woman to rehab today. Yes, her arm ruptured because she shot too much heroin in her vein. You know what? You need to know that. My kids probably don't want to do heroin.
Right.
I mean, like when you see the effects of the suffering that drugs and addiction and exploitation and trafficking bring, first of all, you're not as scared of it. You've got language for it. So you're not even as curious about it. And curiosity is what leads so many kids into sexual temptation or into drugs or into addiction, because there's so much mystery around it. Right. And it's a good thing to be curious. And so we have to fill in some of that curiosity, with our language of how we talk about things. So women in the industry have been, and my teacher, they've been an informant to my family. We've sat around dinner tables together. My kids aren't scared of them. If they come to church with us, they might be wearing a black bra with a see-through white shirt. We're going to have to you're going to have to be okay and just understand she's not trying to threaten you. Mm-hmm. She's not trying. This is how she's survived.
Right.
So yeah, we've got to put down the judgment and listen to the invitation of Christ to hear and to see her in a very human way.
One of the things with Passion4Moms, and the thing that I'm so passionate about, is seeing moms use the platforms that God has given them, recognizing that we are leaders. And it all is going to look different, because your gifts and abilities are going to be different than my gifts and abilities. But God gives us a platform, and we have the opportunity to raise up world changers in our homes, while also using the gifts and talents that He's equipped us with. And in different seasons, God calls us to do different things. What has it looked like for you, practically speaking, from your daughter being in a car seat to now? And I'd be curious the ages of your kids now, but what has that looked like of how you've merged ministry and motherhood, and maybe even some of the challenges, but also just how you were able to do that using your platform, not in compartmentalizing things, but merging the two? Because I think it's really important that in making disciples, we do it as a family.
Yeah, you're right. And it's seasonal in terms of how we flow, and what comes our way. And I think some of the keys for me, number one, communicating with my kids and really asking them. The one thing that Brett and I, because we really thought our lives were going to be in leading worship and music, and we did that just independently as artists for a while, until JSL really turned and wove our lives in a different direction. But one of the things, even as worship leaders, we knew we were both going to be in full-time ministry. We just didn't know what. But we always said, we just don't want our kids to resent the church, or to resent ministry. And we don't want them to feel, I think one of the things our, parents' generation and the church of that generation kind of did. I grew up in a Southern Baptist evangelical home, It was like, remember, when you walk out these doors, you're representing the family, you're representing the ministry, you're representing the church, and it was like, I just took that on, like, oh my gosh, I'm representing so much. And I get that. I get what you're saying in a sense that you belong, you're out, you're part of us as a family. So yeah, okay, I can see that. But what I don't want my kids to feel is this obligation to perform in such a way that somehow what they choose out there is going to bring shame. And we have to be so cautious of using ministry, and whatever God's given me to do is mine to do. And I do it with my children, and they are a part of this for a season.
Right.
But there is no expectation and no shame if God calls them to be an athlete, to be a doctor, you don't have to go and do the family ministry in order to belong here. So I think giving my children choices has been really big, and really listening to them of what makes them come alive. And it's okay if they don't want to be a part of everything. No big deal. Like, remove the shame and the expectation that somehow being a perfect Christian family has to look a certain way. Right. It's just, it's a process of really listening and discerning and honoring your children and their voice and their agency as well.
I was talking with someone the other day just of recognizing that as we are disciple makers in our home, then we also are preparing our kids to launch, but then it's like we're sending out the disciples to go do what God's called them to do. Yeah. And helping equip them to walk into the ministry of whatever that looks like. And it doesn't mean ministry like Christian ministry, but in whatever capacity that they're called to, that they are a light. What has been maybe the biggest challenge for you as you've gone down this path? Because I'm thinking, you've covered a lot of territory in starting a nonprofit. And I know from starting a nonprofit, there's a lot of work, a lot of responsibility, a lot of ups and downs. And so how have you then, as a mom and a wife, been able to do this well? But also, I feel like that it's easy for women to get caught up in the comparison trap, and comparison breeds fear. And when we're comparing, we're taking our eyes off of Jesus. How have you been able to keep those blinders on for so long, for so many years? Or maybe what have been some of the struggles that you've experienced?
Yeah, number one, big shout out to the man by my side who is the CEO of our nonprofit now, because I don't know many men who would have followed their wife's calling. And he really empowered me. He saw the fruit and the blessing, and really just, I was coming alive, and it was like, wow, this is something that we need to be a part of. So big. I couldn't do it without him. And I have so much respect for single moms as well. Tons of respect, who make up the majority of our population that we serve. So I think that what has been a challenge in terms of maybe comparison, I have noticed that it's not just that we're comparing ourselves, but it really is like this little fox that gets in here, and it says for us to compare our work in the world, like even our organization, churches pitted against churches, nonprofits against nonprofit, and it's greed. Right. It's greed. I want what they have, or it's lust, And so I think what I've had to really focus on, and I didn't necessarily learn this in my upbringing, I've had to learn it later in life, is how to draw boundaries and how to take care of myself. because God does not ask you to burn yourself out.
Right.
He is not asking for more burned out, bitter Christians.
Mm-hmm.
He wants believers who are fully alive. He said, I've come that you might have joy.
Right.
And your joy may be full. I mean, I don't know any other way to explain it. I'm like, and that doesn't mean having all the safety and all the possessions and all the material things. Joy is like so deep within us, and that joy is birthed when we can give appropriate boundaries to what's coming in our souls, what's really feeding us, and what's really, really giving us rest. I mean, rest and play and creating have been huge for me. So even though I don't sing on stages anymore, I write music every day. It's just part of my rhythm. It's part of it. It fills me. And in some ways, I feel like it's a lot more pure form of joy and art now, because it's not to be commodified. It's not anything that's paying the bills, if you will, like it used to. And now I can just go, man, I need to sing. I need to sit at the piano. And that's a good, healthy boundary for me, where I can go, this isn't about anyone else. This isn't about anybody else's vote on how Emily is living her life. This is just my time with my God and my gifts that he's given me. And I think that deep work of drawing boundaries and creating space in your life for love to truly infiltrate keeps you full.
That's so good. And, joy is not circumstantial. And so I think as you talk about, you're still writing worship music, but you're not doing it for an audience, except for an audience of one, but you're being able to still take care of yourself. And I think so often we as women want to constantly, we're striving, but we're comparing to so many different people that our strive list is, physical. It's, what house, what car, what vacation, what our kids are doing, how much, and we're wearing ourselves out because, if I'm comparing to this person, now I'm comparing to this person and their list is different. And so you're just beating yourself up, but you're also exhausting yourself and depleting instead of doing what God's called you to do, of whatever that looks like. And being okay that what God calls us to do is going to look different, instead of getting rid of that comparison. But I love how you hit the nail on the head, is it's greed. Mm-hmm. And, when we do look at other ministries or other people who are successful, then oftentimes it's wanting a larger platform or wanting a bigger audience or wanting a bigger paycheck. And so just recognize it's greed.
Yeah, it's greed, and greed is bred in a scarcity mentality. And and Brene Brown talks a lot about that, of what is this feeling of scarcity, that you're not going to get your shot. You're not going to get they got it. They got it. They got all the things that I thought I was going to get.
None left for you.
There's none. Like, you're on your own. And it hits on those, like, pain points for us of what I've learned to do. And there's several different modalities or tools that have been a blessing to me along the way. Enneagram has been a big spiritual formation tool that I've used. I've done some silent retreats at a monastery in Fort Smith, Arkansas, that have been really good. Professional counseling through the Allender Center. He is an amazing Christian psychologist who has a great podcast and deep dive work there. But I think when we start to really go down that road, it really hits on a point of pain in our story, where we feel like we weren't given what we should have had, or there wasn't enough for us, and so it just triggers that. And then it just comes out sideways in our current adulthood life. So true. It does rob us of our joy and rob us of, how we spend our time and our days. And even the mental exhaustion, I think. And social media, this is a given, but like, I just thought last night, I was like, quarantine and COVID, like, my hours on my phone were like through the roof. It was embarrassing. Like, we have like a little small community group, and we were all like, okay, admit it. Like, what does your screen time look like, this week? What was your average? And it was gross. I mean, we were all just like, what are we doing with ourselves? So I really think some people, I just, drawing boundaries around that has been very important. And I'm preaching to myself, because I've gotten really too comfortable of just social media. It leaves you feeling like there's just something you're not doing quite right. Mm-hmm. That somebody else is doing something a little bit better, a little more, cooler or whatever. It's just, comparison.
What, Emily, has been a way that you've been able to instill grit in your kids' lives while also modeling grace? I think one of the things that we talk a lot about at Passion4Moms is we're wanting to raise world changers with grit and grace. And our society models for us a lot of helicopter parenting, snowplow parenting, where we don't want our kids to ever experience failure. We're wanting to remove all the obstacles. We're wanting to do everything for our kids, as opposed to equipping them for real life. What you're doing in your ministry is real life, and the kids' exposure is seeing real life of hurt, because I think what we're doing a disservice to our kids when we're passing out a trophy for everything is we're not letting our kids understand that real life has pain. And actually, being a disciple, we are not immune from pain. Right. So how do you develop as a mom that grit for your kids, so that they are then, when they are leaving your home, they're not only seeing what you do in ministry, but they're actually equipped themselves to be successful adults in society?
I think there's some pretty basic things that we've just drawn some boundaries on this is what we're not going to do. So at a certain age, it's like you're going to pack your lunch, and you're also going to learn how to do laundry, and you're going to have chores every day. My kids, they're supposed to, they don't always do it, but every day it's like you do one chore for yourself, and you do a chore for the team or for our family. And so it's like that can be, I mean, obviously keep your room clean, straighten up your room, make your bed, whatever, and that's for you. But what's something that just benefits the whole? And so that could be loading the dishwasher, straightening up the living room, sweeping the floor, taking the dog for a walk that helps everybody. So I think those things are important. I can't tell you how many failures I've had, like, as a mom. And I think one of the ways we help develop grit in our kids is to embrace our own failure, embrace our own suffering. And that's a gift to them, because I have forgotten so many lunches. The whole lunch rule came along when I would tell them, I'm going to order you lunch, or I didn't go to the store the night before, or I didn't get groceries delivered. And so it was like, okay, no worries. Subway's going to be delivered, Jimmy John's. And then I'd get in a meeting, or I'd get to work, or some crisis would come up with one of the women, and they're calling me like, Mom, where is the sandwich? And I'm like, oh. And so my husband said, Emily, it's real easy. When they ask you, will you bring and order this lunch? You say no. You just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And I don't know if I'm going to remember. And so he really gave me this freedom, because we always have something to eat. It's just not what they want. Right. And so really kind of establishing, like, owning those failures, owning when you get the time wrong to things, and just expressing, hey, Mom's going to fail. Like, we're not perfect. We're not going to do it all right. I think that gives them some capacity to figure things out, of how to face suffering and pain and failure in a really beautiful way.
What would you say, going back just a little bit, you had mentioned about how the women that you serve are often, come into the situation at a disadvantage. It's not like they dream of this is what they want to do with their life when they're little. but you've also talked about how we as women, you know, we should be able to have the platforms and to have a voice, right? Mm-hmm. How have you been able to maintain your voice and your identity as a mother? And because I'm thinking even specifically back to the comment that, you know, the woman who wanted to separate being a mother from doing any kind of ministry. And that's with no judgment in the sense of, I do think, again, there's seasons that God calls us to, of whether it's staying home with our kids, and first and foremost, whatever capacity that we're moms, that we're intentional as moms, and that we're not forsaking our families for the sake of a career or for the sake of ministry. So I say that with, you know, understanding that we're all wanting to be intentional as moms, but how do you find that you're able to maintain and not lose your voice while also being intentional as a mom and in your ministry?
So, and what you mean by that, my voice as a mom, you mean with my children or just in the world? Or how
in the world, as a woman, as a leader, recognizing that you have, you know, you've been given this platform of ministry, but you also have a platform at home. Mm-hmm. Your identity as a woman, mm-hmm. and being able to recognize that you have leadership. Mm-hmm. So what has that looked like for you, just of maintaining, and the reason why I also kind of go down this path is I think that as women in society today, there's a right way and a wrong way for us as women to pursue having a voice, right? Mm-hmm. And so being able to navigate that well, how has that played out for you?
So voice is really an interesting word to me, you know, and I think of even scripture when it talks about, you know, a voice to the voiceless. And I think voice means agency, which means power. And it is powerful to be a mom. Mm-hmm. It is a beautiful, powerful ability to create and sustain life. I mean, unreal when you really think about it. And so that never, ever, ever leaves. It is nothing. It's actually an illusion to believe that we can compartmentalize, because we are created from a triune God who is one, as whole human beings, body, soul, spirit. Everything we do in our body, which is motherhood too. I mean, this is life that came from us, literally in our DNA. I mean, what I've learned and our organization has learned in terms of trauma is that, you know, the body keeps the score. Everything we're doing, touching, seeing, smelling, we're big computers. It gets stored everywhere. So in scripture, when you hear that God, like a mother, gathers her hen, or, you know, children like a hen to her breast, or when you hear these feminine descriptors of even God, and recognizing that as a mom, there is a power, there is an agency, and that it doesn't ever go away. Like, we can try, and I feel I've studied feminism a lot, so I look at, like, even in the 80s, where many women kind of went, okay, I've got to be like a man.
Right.
I need to, okay, the feminist revolution happens in the 60s, and so here are the 80s, and now they're hiring more women because they have to. But women still had to conform to a man's way, to a man's world. And as much as we might try to be like this or that, you can't.
Right.
You can't. And so it's really about bringing shalom and bringing wholeness. Like, maintaining my voice as a mom means I don't ever get to not be that. Even when I try to check out, or I try to disassociate, and I try to pull away, I never leave who I am. This is part of who I am. Right. And so really just bringing that into every sphere of my work has meant I think differently because I'm a mom, and that's a beautiful thing. I can see women who are at a disadvantage with multiple kids whose baby daddies are all different and in different prisons, and I can empathize with her because I am a mom. You need women's voices and mothers' voices at the seat of every sphere of company leadership, because we're creative, we're resourceful, we do things to benefit the world, you know? So yeah, I think not being ashamed of that and bringing that to every part of who I am is important.
I love that. And I think, yeah, that we are not trying to be something that God hasn't created us to be, but that we're able to walk in who God's created us to be. Because, you know, God's made us as women, and being able to embrace motherhood, embrace being a wife, and having that voice from who He's created us to be, instead of trying to get rid of who we've been created to be and try to be like something that we're not.
And it looks a myriad of ways.
Right.
Because each of us are uniquely formed. And so we have to quit comparing and saying, or formalizing and saying, like, this has to look like a one-track way to be a good Christian, especially in the church. Like, we've got to give space for all types of moms who do it all types of ways, and see that there's beauty in that.
So true. So true. We're almost out of time, but as we begin to wrap up, Emily, what would you say that as you are raising your own world changers, what does that leadership that you're wanting to equip them with look like with a servant's heart? So I think about servant leadership and again, whatever capacity that they end up choosing to go into, that God calls them into. What does it look like to equip them so that when they're ready to launch, that they launch well?
You know, unfortunately, most stuff is caught and not taught. That's what I know. And our kids watch us. So if you want to preach at them all day long, great. But they're going to catch what you do more than they catch what you say. And so do your work, serve others, let them see in the quiet moments that you're present, that you're listening, and that you're loving them, you're loving yourself, and you're loving others. And I hope, I mean, I know we'll pay for counseling for all of our children, but I also hope that they catch some good stuff that maybe I didn't even know to teach. Yeah, so it is mostly caught, not taught.
Yeah. And it's all God's grace. His grace is sufficient and His mercies are new every morning. And we all need that as mothers and with the challenges that we face. Is there something particular that it sounds like you've done a lot of education and learning, that you're passionate about learning, whether it's, you talk about feminism or Brene Brown and some of the different things. What's one thing that you still want to learn, or you would say to the audience today, I've learned this and it's been really successful? I mean, you've talked about Enneagrams and different things. What would you say, you know what, invest a little time in this, or maybe just something that you would like to still pursue and learn?
I think right now I'm recognizing the value of stillness and a quiet faith that is very loud in action and loud in what it does in the world. But I embarked on a journey a few years ago to really do my work, to really focus on my own internal work. And I will just say, as moms, we're at the bottom of the list. Usually we are caring for so many others and we are not doing our own work, and God is calling you. There's an invitation to see yourself, to see your story. And the only way to do that is to get quiet. And there is a space for love in that stillness that is unlike anything else I've ever encountered before. And so I would just encourage that stillness in our lives, that slow posture of be still and know. Still.
So
and
good. So good. One final question for you, Emily, as we wrap up, recognizing that you've had this opportunity to do some pretty unusual, if you will, types of ministry. One of the things that we often hear as moms is, Lord, do whatever you want to do with our kids' lives. They're yours, but, and then we start going down the list, but don't send them to Africa, but we don't want them to do this, because again, it comes back to that mentality of, we want church to be safe. We want our lives to be safe. We want to live in safety, and we're not promised safety. What would you say to the mom to encourage them to be a risk taker? Because I think a lot of times we as moms want to, it's our job to protect that hen gathering, the chicks, and to be that mama bear, but to also recognize that, there's risk when we walk with God. How would you encourage the mom who maybe needs to hear that taking risk is in our best interest?
I think that we can all I would say, look at your own life. Look at your own life. And has anything good really come without taking a leap, without taking getting pregnant, birthing a baby, that's a risk. There are so many risks associated with it. And it is natural to want to safeguard and to want to protect. And what you're keeping them from is suffering and pain. And so look at the scriptures of how Christ intersects the pain. All the growth happens in pain. It is this constant cycle of birth, death, resurrection, ascension. All of our lives go on this path because it is the way of Christ. And so when we try to say, no, I don't want to go in the grave. I don't want my kid to go in the grave. I'm going to keep him from the grave. The Lord's like, well, they ain't going to be resurrected. If you can't risk the grave and you can't risk the death, whatever the death might be, it could be a death of their own ego. They didn't make the team. They didn't get in the school that you thought they should be in, or it didn't work out. The school you thought they should be in wasn't a good fit. And there's a death there that you've got to now look for another path. And God is so faithful when we take those risks and we try the new way, even if it's a suffering way. There's so much resurrection coming in that.
And we never know what's on the other side.
We never know. I think, I don't know, wouldn't you agree that there's a lot of things that we thought we knew, and this pandemic, or the multiple pandemics that we're in, have really kind of realigned us in some ways. I think there's been a lot of internal work that we've had to reckon with. And, it's like even the things that were, stupid stuff. Like, I can't get my nails done anymore. I can't get my hair done. All these comforts are taken away from us. But now we're going on walks and bike rides as a family. Now we're hiking in places, we're taking risks together, And so the death created this rebirth that was beautiful.
And I think, to your point, as far as the pandemic, it merges a couple things that you've brought up. I think it's been a forced Sabbath, which you talked about, being still and know. And I think it's also been the realignment of also a reflection and a mirror to our hearts.
Yes.
And we've had to get real about what's important in life. And maybe even some of the ugliness of the things that we're so upset about is revealing our heart.
Oh, man.
And so I think it's very good if we actually are willing to pause and look in the mirror while also being still, because it gives us opportunity to see some of the things that maybe were too high on the priority list, or God's, or being too busy, that maybe God's allowing things to be pulled back and to take inventory of what's really important in life.
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing with us your ministry, your heart, and just how we as moms can use the platforms that God gives us to be a leader in our community and in our homes. And you are doing amazing work. And it's going to be exciting to see as God continues to open doors and just expands and shows favor on the ministry that you're doing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have this discussion, and best of luck to all the moms out there as we navigate some uncertain and uncharted territory. So yeah, find that stillness so you can go the long haul.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Emily.
Thanks so much.